everyone for joining us this morning. Premier Moe will make some opening statements and then I'm going to take your questions.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here today. As we wrap up our spring sitting of the legislature, I want to take a moment to reflect on what this government has accomplished for the people of our province and where our focus remains as we move into the summer months ahead. We are committed to protecting Saskatchewan people and all that matters to Saskatchewan families. And this session has very much been focused on just that, on delivering on that commitment that we have made by ensuring that Saskatchewan remains the most affordable place in the nation of Canada to live, by delivering on strengthening the fact that we can continue to strengthen our Saskatchewan community, improving our healthcare access through the Patients First initiative, and ensuring that we are taking concrete steps to keep our communities safe from corner to corner in this province. When we talk to Saskatchewan people and families, they tell us what matters to them. And it's those conversations that are driving our decisions and driving our priorities as a government, whether it be through legislation like the Compassionate Intervention Act or the announcement of the Patients First Initiative healthcare plan. While the NDP, all too often we see focus on political games and their own internal division, our government remains steadfast in our focus of delivering on behalf of the people that we represent. And it's an honor to serve the network of hardworking, innovative, and compassionate people that make Saskatchewan, without a doubt, the best province in the nation of Canada to live. Over the course of this session, we have passed important legislation that protects Saskatchewan's economic interests and opportunity, defends our autonomy as a province, and keeps life affordable for families, for seniors, and for businesses. At a time when affordability remains top of mind for people across our nation, and yes, including within the province of Saskatchewan, our government continues to take concrete action to keep Saskatchewan strong and affordable. Saskatchewan people still pay among the lowest taxes in our nation. They have the second lowest utility bundle available in our nation. And we continue to deliver targeted affordability measures while growing the economy that funds the very services that we rely on, and I would say the services that make our province the great place to live for families. On community safety, we introduced and advanced measures that will give law enforcement and communities stronger tools to address crime, to protect families, and to respond to concerns with respect to public safety. Saskatchewan people deserve to feel safe in their community wherever they might live. Whether you live in Regina, Saskatoon, Moose Jaw, Prince Albert, Yorkton, or in any rural community across the province. Our government will continue to support our police officers of all enforcement agencies, as well as our frontline responders, to keep Saskatchewan communities safe. On healthcare, we launched the Saskatchewan Patients First Healthcare Action Plan, a plan focused on delivering better access to care, recruiting more healthcare professionals, and improving the outcomes for patients across the province. That plan builds on work that was already underway to hire and retain healthcare professionals throughout the province, reduce our surgical and diagnostic wait times, and improve access to primary care in communities across the province. Our government understands that healthcare must continue to improve, evolve, and embrace the innovation and tools that are available today to provide our healthcare professionals with those very tools and innovations so that they can improve outcomes and put patients first, of which we know they want to. Saskatchewan is an economic leader, and we can be very, very proud of this. We continue to see strong exports. We see strong private sector investment in major projects that are moving ahead in agriculture, in mining, in energy, and in manufacturing. In fact, there are over 60 projects that are moving forward in a total of over $62 billion in private sector investment. This is unlike any time in our province's history, and it certainly is unlike anything that we are seeing happening in any province across the nation of Canada today. Companies are choosing Saskatchewan because of our stable economy, stable regulatory environment, because of the resources that we possess, but I would say most importantly because of the hardworking, innovative people who call this province home. Now we compare that to some degree with what the opposition has been up to this session. The NDP spent much of this spring session focused on themselves rather than Saskatchewan people. In fact, they couldn't even hold their own caucus together, losing one of their own MLAs to go sit as an independent. That's not stability, and that is not providing sound leadership. While they focused on division and personal attacks and negativity, our government remains focused on solutions and results on behalf of the families that we represent across this province. Because at the end of the day, Saskatchewan people expect their government to show up and to focus on the priorities that are important to them. priorities like protecting our affordability, protecting our healthcare system, protecting the very safety that we have in our communities, and protecting the economic opportunity for today and for generations into the future. And that's exactly what this government will continue to do. I also want to acknowledge that many Saskatchewan communities continue to deal with challenging weather conditions. Significant storm coming through our province as we speak, floods, fire concerns that we may have. And we want to take a moment to thank all of the emergency responders, whether they be local, municipal, or provincial emergency responders, the leaders in those very communities, and all of the volunteer crews who are working so hard to protect our communities, protect our homes, and keep people safe. Keep people safe across the province. As seeding continues, which is one of the most significant mega projects in Canada that happens on an annual event, I want to thank Saskatchewan producers for the work that they do every single day to feed our province and over 160 countries around the world. Saskatchewan most certainly remains strong today. Saskatchewan today has a government that is laser focused in 4 priority areas: improving our healthcare outcomes through our Patients First initiative, keeping our communities safe by providing recovery opportunities and supporting our frontline enforcement officers across this province, taking concrete, actionable steps to ensure that Saskatchewan remains the most affordable province in the nation of Canada to live, and ensuring that we have the strongest economy in the nation so that we can make those necessary investments to ensure that Saskatchewan remains the very best place to live. And I would ask people this: when you look across our nation at the affordability of buying a house in some of our major cities, whether it be Toronto or Vancouver, when you look at the challenges and access to healthcare that we're seeing in other provinces, where else would you truly want to live outside of Saskatchewan? Where else would you truly want to live, raise your family outside of Saskatchewan? Saskatchewan remains strong because of the people who call this province home. Our government will continue working each and every day to ensure that is the case today, tomorrow, and for generations to come. So be happy to take any questions.
So the NDP have called today for the firing of Jerry Jackson.
Well, I would say there is one call for the removal of one individual in this legislature as we speak, and that's the Leader of the Opposition by her very own party supporters. There would be a second call that happened a number of weeks ago, and that was to remove the Chief of Staff to the NDP leader for sending out fundraising emails that were inspiring people and asking people to hate husbands and fathers that have chosen to put their name forward and serve in public office and were duly elected by their very constituents. So to answer your question, no, that is not going to happen. And I would ask what for? For recommending to the government of Saskatchewan that we adopt and move forward with the most affordable electricity plan that is available to us. We have a choice as a government with respect to power, which I think is the basis of this question. We have a choice as a government to ensure that we are making those decisions that ensure that we have affordable power rates today for families across this province, and we have affordable and reliable power rates into the future for generations to come. That's the recommendations that this minister has brought forward, and that's the recommendations that the government is acting on.
Do you feel it's the most important piece of legislation or thing that your government has done?
The Patients First Healthcare Initiative. The Patients First Healthcare Initiative is bringing in 50 concrete action items to support, bringing in today's innovation and tools to support our healthcare workers so that they can improve outcomes in facility after facility, community after community, right across this province. It includes initiatives in health, human resource recruitment, retention, training, increasing the training spaces. It sets targets around diagnostics and sets targets around time that we will have to access a surgery in this province. And it is, as I say, 50 actionable items that are truly going to provide the right care in the right time at the right place. And as I say, it's a living document. We're going to continue to bring in those tools and innovation as they become available to ensure that we can continue to improve our healthcare initiative. Again, I would say, when you look across Canada, this is unlike anything that is happening in any other province, a very focused, actionable plan to support our healthcare professionals in improving the outcomes in our healthcare system. I feel that was likely the most important initiative that this government has embarked on this summer, or this session. And what I would say is none of that is possible. It's backed up by the investments in the very budget that we passed in this Legislative Assembly this spring. None of that is possible without the nation-leading strength of the economy that we have.
On the subject of the budget, I'm kind of curious about the state of it, given how high WTI is right now. Just get just a little bit of an assessment of how the deficit is looking, how the budget's looking in light of WTI, but also how it's looking in light of some of the unexpected costs from the flooding.
Yeah, there'll be some costs. There'll be pressures each way. We'll have a more accurate update as we get to Q1. I think we're probably about 35, 40 days into this fiscal year. And so, yes, the positive impacts on the budget would be the WTI. We're seeing some increases in the potash space as well, and we can be very thankful that we have those resources and that we've been able to develop them to the degree that we have today. But we look to develop them even more into the future to impact, yes, the provincial bottom line, the national bottom line, but the bottom line of families, for families across this province. But there are very real pressures as well. We have pressures with respect to hiring more healthcare professionals into our healthcare system are going to be a pressure as we find our way through this year. There are pressures, as you rightfully identified, with some of the flooding costs that are there, and the provincial government will have to carry some of those pressures even through for example, the Provincial Disaster Assistance Program, which does have a federal portion to it, but the provincial government will carry some of those costs in the interim. So there are very real pressures. We'll have a more accurate update, I think, on where we are when we get closer to Q1, but there's movement both ways for sure.
Just in terms of power generation, the briefing note from yesterday that's forming a lot of what been discussed in the question period spoke about power rates doubling and increasing, I think, 95% by 2040. That's contingent on there not being carbon pricing applied. It appears as though Alberta sets to sign some kind of an agreement with Ottawa respecting carbon pricing. And in light of that, in light of the fuel costs associated with coal, in light of the OPEX and CAPEX, I'm curious about how that still is the most affordable power generating method for Saskatchewan, given what we've seen from these leaks, given what we know about carbon pricing, and given what we know about how much coal on it.
Without a doubt, it is. And let me just take a few moments just to do the comparison on what we're talking about here. And what we're talking about is, how do we retain 1,500 megawatts of power in this province while we build to our nuclear future? That is what this discussion is. And let me put that in context for, to Saskatchewan people. This would essentially be the comparison of a family that wants to build a home, a dream home, but it's a 10-year build for that home. What is that family going to do for those 10 years, that interim period? Are you going to continue to live where you are and maintain the home that you have until 10 years when your dream home is done and you can move into it? Or are you going to build a new home to live in for those 10 years and then move into the dream home that your family has saved all their life to do? And we would suggest, and I think Saskatchewan people would agree, is that you maintain the existing asset that you have. That is the cheaper way forward, and that is the more affordable way forward. And that is precisely what we're doing when we look at how do we maintain 1,500 megawatts of power in this province through those years while we build out to that nuclear future. And so let's just leave a couple of things aside. First is the fact that with the NDP plan, they had talked about LNG and then moved away from that because they didn't know the difference between LNG and natural gas. Leave the carbon tax out of that discussion. The capital cost for the Saskatchewan plan to maintain our existing assets is $2.6 billion. The capital cost of the grid and growth plan that the NDP has is over $20 billion. What the NDP have done is construed 25 years, brought in 25 years of operating cost, of capital costs, yes, of fuel costs, of labor costs, and of transmission costs, which I'm unsure why, because all power will need transmission. And they've said that over 25 years, the government plan would be $26 billion. By those same metrics, by that apples-to-apples comparison, their plan is over $50 billion. Over $50 billion, over double the cost. So I want to talk just briefly as well about the fact that this government and this minister, and I think Saskatchewan people would expect the government to do this with respect to the modelling that SaskPower does. We ask them to model every scenario that is possible. And I think they should, so that we can actually make the decisions on what is the most affordable path forward. And we've chosen that path. The path that that the NDP plan is essentially modeled on, and it was talked about yesterday by the NDP, that it's their plan is very similar to what the previous plan of SaskPower was, to be compliant with the Trudeau clean electricity regulations. And so the NDP plan is essentially the plan that is compliant with Justin Trudeau's clean electricity regulations, of which are already being modified and changed as recently as of a couple of hours ago with the release of the changes that Prime Minister Mark Carney and the federal government has made. So they have a Trudeau plan, which is going to cost over twice as much on operating costs over 25 years, and going to cost over $20 billion rather than the $2.6 billion in capital plan that we have. They've hired a Quebec consultant essentially to use what are leaked documents of some of the modeling documents that SaskPower has, that we asked them to do so we could choose the most affordable and reliable path forward. And that Quebec consultant has essentially recommended to them that they adopt the Trudeau plan, which was too expensive. That's precisely the plan that the government of Saskatchewan chose not to implement in this province because it was too expensive for Saskatchewan families. It's fine if the NDP are there to adopt that plan. I want to address a couple of other things with respect to what has been brought forward by the opposition. The first is a doubling of power rates by 2040. I don't believe that to be true. That is not the case. In fact, that would happen if we adopted the Trudeau plan and there was no changes to the clean electricity regulations. We actually feel there's a way to chart a path forward with the federal government. Part of that path was announced this morning with the openness to have negotiations around and changes to the clean electricity regulations that were introduced by Justin Trudeau a few years ago. That is changing. So that doubling of the power rates that the NDP is referring to is false. That is not the case. That is not the plan for, that's not the government's plan in any way. However, that would be the result, or even higher, should we adopt their Trudeau plan. Second is the extreme risk that is identified. What is identified is extreme regulatory risk, like the Justin Trudeau clean electricity regulations. Those have changed as of a couple of hours ago, and this government has been part of those discussions with the federal government to precipitate some of those changes and some of that openness. And I would point to that document at a very high level this morning, and there will be many negotiations on the details to happen in the days ahead. Prioritizes nuclear power, which is the direction Saskatchewan is going. Prioritizes interties of electricity with other provinces, of which most certainly Saskatchewan can play a significant role in. And it prioritizes not shuttering assets that are not turning off 1 megawatt of power that we currently have today. So there's going to be many discussions that happen as we work with the federal government to chart our electricity path forward. But the doubling of the rates by 2040, as the NDP suggests, I don't believe that to be the case. That will not be the case in this province. And we are going to ensure that we prioritize every decision we make under the guise of energy security, reliable supply, and affordable power for the people of the province. And that is what is driving our decisions. And that is why we made the decision to move away from that Trudeau-era, Trudeau-compliant power plan that the NDP have adopted on the advice of their Quebec consultant.
The new federal changes also say that natural gas is going to be a key way forward. I guess you've rejected and pivoted away from natural gas. What's your response to Prime Minister Mark Carney saying natural gas is going to be
And that's part of our conversation, because we have a number of natural gas facilities, one that is under construction as we speak. We have one in Swift. We have a number of them across the province. And so we need to have those discussions. If you remember, and this is some of the regulatory risk under the Trudeau and now the NDP plan that is there, is that all natural gas facilities were going to have to be outfitted with CCS by, I think, 2035. That negotiation is now open on how can we utilize those transitional forms of power, whether it be any of the power transitional forms, the existing generation capacity that we have. How do we utilize that to ensure that we can actually take concrete steps to a nuclear-powered future, which is lower emissions? How can we do that in a way that is going to provide affordable, reliable power for the people of Saskatchewan, not just today, but for years into the future? There's another piece that's being forgotten, but it was front of mind here this week. We have families in Estevan and Coronach that have provided energy security for our province, for other families and industries across this province for generations. That is our nuclear workforce. as we find our way through the next number of years, it's those individuals and their children and their grandchildren that we are going to be able to train to work in the nuclear facilities that we intend to build over the next number of years. And as I used in my original analogy, what we need to do and what is driving the decisions of the government and the recommendations of this minister are affordable, reliable power today and every day into the future. And those families and those generational, those folks that have provided energy security for generations and will for generations to come are part of that plan.
The federal government's national electricity strategy has exactly one mention of coal, and it's just when it's talking about how well the country has done in reducing reliance on coal. So how well do you expect discussions, consultations with the federal government to go when your government is holding so tightly to coal generation?
We are going to reduce our reliance on coal as we build out our nuclear capacity. And so the question isn't how or if, it's when. But what we're going to do is transition that very workforce that is working in our thermal sites today to be able to work in our nuclear sites that will be coming tomorrow. We're working closely with, for example, and have plans to work with not only the federal government on what this plan looks like moving forward, which will be a significant reduction in emissions over time in our province, and I would say across Canada as well, as we are not the only province interested in a nuclear future or expanding nuclear power into the future. But we're going to ensure that it is also going to provide affordable, reliable electricity for most importantly families, but also industries that we are attracting here today and continue to attract in the future. So that is not a matter of disagreeing on the direction of our government, but there is a discussion to be had on timelines. And as I said in my opening comments, it's very similar to the analogy of if you want to build that dream house, what is the most affordable path forward for the next 10 years? To stay and maintain in the house you're in, or as the NDP suggests, is to build a brand new house, live in that for 10 years and then move.
Premier, you mentioned that SaskPower models out all scenarios, and you also mentioned that
we ask them to, always, and continue to.
Okay, so is there a model or a scenario where, discussions lead to dramatic reduction in sort of carbon pricing and regulations? What does that model out to in terms of a rate increase for the people of Saskatchewan? If the assumption is that you don't reduce those through negotiations, the model leads to 95% by 2040. What model?
It won't, though. That's all changed as of this morning.
I'm asking, what is the model that leads you to believe that it will be much less, and what does that project out to?
Well, we're going to go through some of these negotiations, and we've been, I would say, largely in some of these conversations with our federal government as well. There's Minister Hodgson. I talked to him this week about it. Had a short text conversation with the Prime Minister this morning as well. And I think there's a federal government that's very open as the priorities in their clean electricity updated plan today to have a focus on nuclear. Have a focus on interties between provinces. Both, I think, are a priority for our province of Saskatchewan. But last but not least is to ensure that we're not stranding assets. If we truly are focused on affordable power and not turning off a megawatt of power in this nation in the foreseeable future, because we do need it all, in particular in Saskatchewan, where we see some of the highest rates of private sector investment in industrial projects that are going to advance that Canadian economy and allow us as a nation to achieve that strongest economy in the G7 and an energy superpower and all those aspirations that the Prime Minister has. We cannot turn off 1 megawatt of power. However, you need a concrete plan moving forward on how you are going to provide that same level of affordability and reliability into the future. And a concrete plan, I think, in fairness, that is going to significantly reduce the emissions on how we are generating power today and how we are generating power into the future. And that's what we're focused on, is how do we ensure we have affordable power between now and when we can move into that nuclear space. And the other part of it, here's one of the metrics in that conversation. Right now, we're looking at a 14-year regulatory process to build a nuclear reactor. We have a major projects office. There very much is an opportunity for us to work with the nuclear industry, to work with our SaskPower utility, and to work with the federal government on advancing that regulatory process. So maybe it's down to 5, 6, 7 years as opposed to 14 years, and that brings this whole conversation forward.
We have an equivalency agreement that runs out at the end of the year. I'm curious about the cost of extending that, what conversations you had, because without that equivalency agreement, I think that it does pose some difficulty in the continuation of burning coal. especially in light of the federal regulations that still have December 31st, 2029 as the phase out date for it.
There's many questions in this space around, who actually has jurisdiction on making these particular decisions under the very Canadian Constitution that we have. But I think there is an alliance and there is an openness to the conversation, certainly by the province, but also by the federal government on, what does our energy secure future look like? How does that impact affordability for Saskatchewan residents? Saskatchewan's playing an outsized role in driving the Canadian economy, I would say today, and will into the future. How do we ensure we preserve that investment environment? So when Saskatchewan does well, we're going to contribute to a stronger Canada. So how do we ensure that environment is there and into the future? And so there's an openness for this conversation. There's many questions that will be asked and answered, I'm sure, over the next period of time. I don't know if I would look for a replacement of the equivalency agreement, whether in Alberta they call it a memorandum of understanding on the economic opportunities to operate in the industrial space, of which we're also part of those discussions, and we'll be refining some of what we see coming forward so that it works for our energy industry in Saskatchewan and more broadly our mining and industrial sector as a whole. So many discussions to happen in the months ahead, weeks and months ahead. But I would say with the announcement of the electricity strategy this morning, significant changes to the Trudeau-era clean electricity standards is a signal of openness from the federal government to continue with the discussions that we have already been a part of, and to continue in a way that does keep the economy at the forefront, does keep the affordability of how we access power that we need today and the more that we will need tomorrow at the forefront. And three is always building towards, in the federal government's goals, a net zero electricity grid by 2050. And nuclear is our path to achieve that.
It seems like Alberta is getting ready to sign this agreement, though, on carbon pricing. I'm curious if you're confident that you can strike a deal with Ottawa that does not include carbon pricing, or how that looks.
Well, there's a number of different buckets that carbon pricing fits into. One would be the one that was lifted earlier on the gas pumps when we buy fuel. I think natural gas is included in that. Two would be industrial emitters that our energy industry, our mining industry, and that's the discussions that are happening with the federal government. And credit to Premier Smith and Prime Minister Carney for embarking on those discussions in good faith and trying to find a landing spot. It might not be perfect for Alberta. It might not be perfect from the federal government's perspective as well. But as Canadians, we have a duty, I think, to sit down and see if we can find a place that is actually workable for the industry, for the people, and for ultimately us as a nation. And I credit both of them for embarking on that discussion in good faith to try to find that place. The third space, I would say, is with respect to a Crown utility, which is owned by the people of the province of Saskatchewan. And that is an entirely different discussion with respect to, is there going to be a carbon tax on producing electricity for, in our case, Saskatchewan families, but any families across the nation. And that's a discussion that we've been part of for some time and will continue to be part of. All the while, I would just say this, the focus of that discussion is how do we build out that nuclear future, far less emissions, far less of the rate of any carbon taxation is far less of a challenge. And how do we do so in a way that's going to provide security for the workers that have provided energy security to our provincial families and industries for years? And how do we do it in a way that's going to provide affordable power into the future and reliable power into the future as well? What I've found thus far is the federal government, right up to the Prime Minister's office, is very open to those discussions. And so we continue to do modeling. And so for any Quebec consultants that are going to be capturing leaked documents from SaskPower, I have news for you. You're going to continue to see modeling coming out of SaskPower. However, the government of Saskatchewan, alongside our power utility, is going to make the very best decisions that we can, pending agreements that we can come to with the federal government to provide that affordable, reliable power for generations into the future.
Would you be open to just releasing the modeling and the financial analysis, just sort of as a means to show your homework and show that, yes, in fact,
there would be so much more. I just gave you the numbers with respect to what the Trudeau-era plan is.
Creates a financial analysis. There is a bit more to that isn't necessarily communicated by way of the press.
Yeah, you know what? I think the CEO of SaskPower will be over later, and I think he can speak with some credibility to the modeling that they do and the costs of, the Trudeau NDP plan versus the plan that we chose. That was as a government that, not just my opinion, but factually, is much more affordable for how we're going to access power and how families across this province are going to access power.
What was your reaction to the federal government's electricity announcement this morning and some of the details in it?
Well, not surprising, and I think it's been, you know, I think it's been in the works for a while. And in fairness, I would say that through some of the conversations that we've had with various ministers and the Prime Minister and the PMO's office, that Saskatchewan had a hand in this, a hand in you know, providing where we are and where we're going in how we produce affordable, reliable electricity in our province for the industries that are here, the industries that are building here. And most importantly, you know, families from corner to corner in this province. So we've talked, you know, at length about the opportunity that interties provide. We're building an intertie into the Southwest Power Pool in the U.S. as we speak. We're building another to service some of the uranium mines that are being built in the north. We have capacity in that line. You know, an obvious intertie conversation might be with Northwest Territories that today is not connected to any other grid. They're an isolated grid. Their closest connection point is Uranium City. There are opportunities for Saskatchewan to play a significant role in providing power not only for our industries and our families in an affordable and reliable way, but actually to tie into some of our provincial neighbours and solidify not only our grid and our opportunity, but help them solidify theirs.
Premier, question from our Saskatoon office. With Saskatoon homelessness response being stretched beyond what it is capable of handling as demand surges, what is the provincial government doing to help specifically with upstream services that focus on long-term strategy?
Well, and I think there was a report, and I just don't quote me on these numbers, I go off memory with respect to a homelessness count that was done in Saskatoon a number of months ago on a significant number of those individuals actually coming in from other areas of the province, and two is a significant number of them, I think in 80% plus, are actually also struggling with addictions. This is one of the priority pieces and focuses of the government in Saskatchewan, is to provide recovery opportunities. We're building out that capacity. This budget funds us our commitment of 500 recovery beds. We're building out the access points, whether it be through an urgent care centre, which will be opening in Saskatoon very shortly. The complex needs facility, which is operating both in Saskatoon and Regina, soon to be operating in Prince Albert. That's an access point. The Compassionate Intervention Act that was introduced and passed on the very floor of this assembly, working with our frontline enforcement officers to ensure that the policies and regulations are workable in a very helpful way for our frontline officers and for families. And then I might add that it's families largely that have asked for the opportunity to intervene with a loved one to provide them with that recovery opportunity. So we need the capacity, we need the access points. That's happening, and it was identified that a significant number of people that are living without a home are also struggling with addictions. We owe it to them as a government, and I would say as people that live in a province that has this nation-leading economy, to be able to use the strength of that economy to make these very investments in individuals that are no longer a community away and are no longer someone that you don't know. All too often they're our friends and family. We owe it to them to provide them a recovery opportunity. However, we also owe to the broader public the opportunity to have a safe community, and that's why we're making the investments in law enforcement officers. I think over 37 provincially funded, municipally hired law enforcement officers were added just this past year and a half in the city of Saskatoon. 100 municipal province-wide. The marshals will be building out to 70 officers and 180 RCMP officers as well, all to support one another in providing safer communities, not just in Saskatoon, but across this province. Add to that our Path 2.0 funding, yes, emergency shelters, but also the transitional housing. As people maybe are able to come through their recovery process, that they have an opportunity to access a home and maybe a supportive living to begin with, and to aspire to be all that they aspired to be prior to entering that life of addictions. We owe it to them as a government, to these people, brothers, sisters, children, daughters, sons. We owe it to them to provide them this opportunity for the recovery lifestyle and to do everything we can to make that the obvious choice. Thank you, everybody.